Welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we sit down to explore a stack of research, we're looking for a subtle trend, like a slight shift in consumer behavior, or maybe a historical quirk.
Right, a little detail that explains a modern market cycle.
Yeah, exactly. But today is different. Today's deep dive isn't just an academic exercise. It is, for all intents and purposes, a survival guide.
A manual for understanding how a global system breaks down, not in theory, but in brutal mechanical reality.
We are dissecting this incredibly dense, completely myth-busting working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's called The Anatomy of a Trade Collapse, the UK, 1929 to 33.
And the researchers here, Bromhead, Fernihough, Lampe, and O'Rourke, they have done something genuinely unprecedented.
But look, we are not going to just read their methodology to you.
No, absolutely not. The implications of what they found are way too visceral to bury in academic jargon. The data they uncovered, it literally reveals the physical laws of economic panic.
So we built something specifically for you, the listener. We want you to treat this like a theater of the mind.
Just imagine you are sitting alone in a dark room.
Yeah. The screen in front of you hums to life. We have designed a highly focused 20-slide mental presentation, just 20 visuals.
But if you want to understand why the globalization we all take for granted can just, vanish overnight, you absolutely must see this.
It forces you to unlearn everything, all the conventional wisdom about how the world economy collapsed a century ago.
And by extension, how it could collapse tomorrow.
Are you ready? Let's bring up the first visual on that screen in your mind. We're calling this slide The End of Modern Prosperity and the Return of the Phantom.
So picture a stark, minimalist white background. There's no text, no clutter at all.
Right.
Right in the center, there is a single, delicate black line. It maps the United Kingdom's trade to GDP ratio over 150 years.
From the Victorian era all the way to the modern day. You watch this line climbing, it dips a little, but it generally just hums along.
Yeah.
It represents the relentless march of global connection.
Exactly. And then, right at the year 1929 on the timeline, there is a brutal, thick red arrow. It points straight down into an absolute abyss.
The line completely falls off a cliff.
The question this visual poses is the suspense hook for our entire deep dive. Why does globalization, at the very peak of its absolute undeniable prosperity, suddenly regress by 100 years overnight?
I have to admit, staring at this visual, it's a shock to the system. We are conditioned to think of globalization as a permanent upward staircase.
Yeah, we invent the telegraph, then the telephone, the internet.
Ships get faster, shipping containers get standardized. We just assume the staircase only goes up because human progress only moves forward.
But this graph shows a trapdoor hidden right under the carpet.
It shatters the ultimate illusion of modern economics.
It really does. Between 1870 and 2015, the two most catastrophic plunges on this timeline were 1921 and 1929. The data proves that the lifeline of world trade is unspeakably fragile.
We treat global connection like it's a law of physics, like gravity.
But it isn't. It's a man-made web of trust, credit, and demand. And it can be wiped out in a matter of months.
It looks like a heart monitor flatlining. But the thing is, you can't figure out why a heart stopped just by staring at the flatline on the monitor.
No, you have to open up the chest, you have to look at the arteries.
Which brings us to the methodology of the authors. And the second visual in our mental deck. We'll title this one, Anatomy of a Great Collapse.
Look at the screen now. On the left side, we have the stark clinical details of the working paper. But on the right side, there is a hand-drawn illustration.
It shows a heavy brass microscope zooming in on a decaying, dusty merchant's shipping ledger.
The people who finally decoded the mystery of the world's greatest economic collapse aren't loud politicians on a debate stage.
Right, or macroeconomic theorists drawing broad curves on a whiteboard.
They are four scholars who spent years doing the unglamorous, grueling work of flipping through the dustiest ledgers in human history.
I want to pause on the sheer scale of what they did, because it is insane. They didn't look at macro fluff. They didn't look at sweeping, aggregated estimates of what the UK imported.
No, they manually digitized tens of thousands of micro-level commodity and country trade data entries.
Every single item from every single country imported into the UK between 1929 and 1933.
They tracked 258 distinct product categories coming from 42 different countries. It is an unprecedented, hyper-detailed digital autopsy of the Great Depression.
It's literally like CSI for the global economy. But instead of looking at the chalk outline on the sidewalk, they're doing DNA analysis on the individual drops of blood.
tracing the individual crates of apples, the individual shipments of machine parts, the exact tons of coal that stopped crossing the ocean.
But getting down to that granular level, they remove the historical static. When you look at the macro numbers, you just see the world shrink.
But when you look at the micro ledgers, you see the exact mechanism of death. You see how the world shrinks.
And what they found makes our modern crises look entirely different. Let's shift to the third visual. The century comparison. The fatal symmetry of 2008 and 1929.
Picture a brutal double bar chart appearing on your screen. On the left side, there is a light gray, incredibly shallow dip. That represents the 2008 financial crisis.
Okay, wait. I lived through 2008. We all did. Millions of people lost their homes, their life savings, their jobs.
Entire legacy financial institutions evaporated over a weekend.
Yeah. We thought it was a once-in-a-century financial tsunami. Calling it a shallow dip feels almost insulting.
It feels insulting until you look at the right side of the chart. That light gray dip from 2008 is completely dwarfed by a terrifying dark gray bottomless chasm right next to it.
That is 1929.
On the scale of historical destruction, 2008 was a pathetic little ripple.
This is a face-slapping realization for anyone who thinks we've seen the worst the economy can do. We are incredibly arrogant to think 2008 was the worst-case scenario.
The data strips away that arrogance immediately. Let's look at the log points. During the Great Recession of 2009, UK imports fell by a mere 0.076 log points.
It hurt, obviously.
Yes, but the Great Depression. From 1929 to 1933, there was a catastrophic cumulative drop of 0.54 log points.
So we are talking about a collapse that is roughly 7 times deeper than the worst financial crisis in modern memory.
The sheer destructive scale of 1929 is beyond our modern comprehension. We aren't talking about a recession. We are talking about the total systemic erasure of the global flow of capital and goods.
But how does an erasure that massive actually manifest in the physical world? Because, my brain immediately jumps to an apocalyptic image. I picture empty oceans.
Right.
I picture half the cargo ships in the world just dropping anchor and rusting in the harbor. But that isn't what happened, is it?
Not at all. And that brings us to the fourth slide. We'll call this Beneath the Bubble Did the Ships Disappear, or the Prices.
The screen changes again. Giant bold text takes up the entire slide. It just says 83%.
And beneath that massive number, there is a hollow arrow pointing straight down. It is labeled price deflation.
If world trade value plummets by more than half, the natural, logical assumption is that half the volume of stuff stopped moving. You'd think the ship stopped sailing.
But the truth is the exact opposite, and this is the core illusion of the early trade collapse.
Okay, I need you to explain this mechanism clearly, because if the value of global trade is cratering, how are the ships still moving?
They kept sailing because the physical movement of goods barely stopped at first. The cargo holds were still full of grain and steel. The dock workers in London were still breaking their backs unloading crates.
Okay.
What vanished wasn't the physical stuff, it was the value of the stuff.
So an astounding 83% of the decline in import value between 1929 and 1933 was driven purely by prices dropping, not quantities.
Correct. The volume of imports barely budged in the initial phase, but the prices went into absolute freefall.
It's like walking into your local supermarket. You brace yourself for empty shelves, but you walk in and the aisles are totally packed. The shelves are overflowing with food.
The produce section is fully stocked.
Yeah. But then you look at the price tags, and a loaf of bread suddenly costs a single penny. A gallon of milk costs a fraction of a cent. The physical economy didn't empty out. The value of it just became worthless.
It creates a ghost economy. You are moving mountains of raw materials. You are burning the exact same amount of fuel in the ships. You are paying for the same amount of labor to move the cargo.
But the revenue simply evaporates.
Exactly. Which means these businesses are bleeding out while operating at 100% capacity. They are working themselves to death for pennies.
And this is where the autopsy of the UK ledgers reveals a completely different pathology than our modern crises. Let's transition to the fifth slide. The brutal reality of supply.
On the screen, a simple table appears. It is heavily marked up with aggressive red and green circles, contrasting the year 1930 with the year 2009.
We have two massive global financial disasters. So why did the global economy in 2008 react by turning off the factory lights and stopping production, while everyone in 1929 just frantically slashed their prices to the bone?
Look at the mechanics on the table. In 1930, import prices plunged by negative 0.129. But the physical quantity barely dropped at all, just a tiny blip of negative 0.013.
They kept shipping. They just took the massive hit on price.
But look at 2009. It is a total mirror image. In 2009, prices actually went up slightly, positive 0.021.
Wait, really?
Yeah, but the physical amount of goods shipped fell off an absolute cliff, negative 0.096.
Why does this matter to the listener? Like, why should they care about the difference between price drops and quantity drops?
Because it shows two totally different ways a global system bleeds out. 1929 was a deflationary death spiral. You have massive overhead, so you drop your prices just to get some cash to survive.
But your competitor does the exact same thing.
So you drop them again. Eventually, money itself becomes a weapon against you. You are producing just to bankrupt yourself slower.
And 2009.
2009 was a factory shutdown heart attack. Global supply chains were highly integrated and just in time. When the credit froze, production simply stopped. The assembly lines went dark.
Prices held relatively steady, but the volume of the world just shrank.
Two different eras, two entirely different diseases killing the host.
But here's the crazy part. The specific organs that failed first were exactly the same. Look at the next visual, slide 6. Shocking structural consistency.
The visual is a scatter plot map. The 2008 crash is mapped on the horizontal x-axis. The 1929 crash is on the vertical y-axis.
Down in the bottom left corner, highlighted in a glowing red danger zone, are cars and heavy industrial goods. Up in the top right corner in a calm green safe zone is food.
These two events happened 80 years apart. In 1929, we're talking about Model A Fords and coal-powered steam machinery.
In 2008, we're talking about flat-screen TVs and hybrid SUVs.
Totally different technologies, totally different generations of humans, and yet the exact same industries were thrown overboard first.
This is one of the most profound findings in the ledgers. It reveals the physical laws of human panic. Whether it is 1929 or 2008, the psychological mechanism of fear operates identically.
When a crisis hits, automotive vehicles and durable industrial materials suffer catastrophic, immediate hits.
Let me translate this into everyday reality. When you watch the stock market crash on your smartphone, or when your great-grandfather watched the ticker tape machine spit out bad news in 1929, the reaction is the same.
Nobody goes out and buys a new car when the sky is falling. You delay the big, durable purchase.
But everybody still buys a sandwich. Food and non-durable consumer goods survive relatively untouched in both eras.
It totally shatters the illusion of consumer evolution. We like to think we are sophisticated, hyper-rational consumers in the 21st century.
The data says we are not. Our panic response is hardwired. We instantly freeze spending on durables.
The correlation across product categories between the 1929 crash and the 2008 crash is strikingly, almost terrifyingly similar. The technological dressing changes, but the human animal does not.
So the demand for cars and heavy machinery vanishes. But what happens to the companies that supply those supply chains? Do they just get wiped off the map entirely? Move your eyes to the seventh visual. We'll call this one Edge of Survival. Are companies shrinking or exiting?
On the screen, two skyscraper-like bar charts stand side by side. One represents 1929, the other represents 1933, the absolute rock bottom of the Depression.
And shockingly, the two skyscrapers are almost exactly the same height.
I know you really struggled with this one when we were reading the research.
I did, because when the apocalypse hits, I assume entire trade routes are abandoned. I picture a map where the lines connecting countries just disappear. I assume companies go bankrupt and the supply chain is completely erased.
Economists frame this as the intensive versus extensive margin, but we don't need the academic terms. Think of it like a massive network of water pipes.
Okay.
The extensive margin asks, did the pipes physically break and disappear? The intensive margin asks, are the pipes still there, but with way less water flowing through them?
So what did the autopsy of the UK ledgers find?
In 1929, the UK imported 1,338 different varieties of goods. They had a massively diverse inflow of products from all over the world. By 1933, after the economy had been bleeding for 4 years, they still imported 4,298 varieties.
That is only a 3% drop in the variety of goods. That means 97% of the distinct trade channels survived.
The global network was desperately clinging to life. The physical pipelines survived. The trade networks remained intact. They just sent drastically less volume through them.
This is so counterintuitive. Why would a shipping line keep a massive logistical network open just to ship a tiny fraction of what they used to?
Because of the massive fixed costs of establishing global trade. If you abandon a trade route, it takes years and millions of dollars to rebuild those relationships and logistics.
So merchants and shipping lines took agonizing financial losses just to keep the routes alive, praying that demand would return before they ran out of cash.
But the demand wasn't returning. Something was strangling it. Which brings us to the eighth visual and probably the most dangerous historical myth we are going to bust today: the culprit who choked free trade.
Picture a pure, sterile white background. A simple gray hourglass sits in the middle. The sand is pouring out from the top to the bottom.
But here is the key detail. There are absolutely zero walls or barriers around the hourglass. It sits completely out in the open.
If you ask almost anyone with a basic understanding of history, ask a college professor, ask a politician why global trade died in 1929, they will confidently tell you one thing.
Because everyone panicked and built massive tariff walls.
Exactly. They'll point to the Holly Smoot tariff in America and say protectionism killed the global economy.
The microdata from the UK proves them dead wrong, at least regarding the initial cause of death.
This is a huge realization. Walk us through it.
From 1929 to 1931, the United Kingdom, the undisputed center of global trade at the time, maintained absolute, uncompromising free trade.
They didn't put up new tariffs?
No new tariffs. They built no protectionist walls. Their borders were wide open.
And what happened to their imports?
Despite having zero new tariffs, UK imports still crashed by a staggering 29.44%.
Wait, so protectionism wasn't the spark that lit the fire?
Tariffs were not the initial murderer. The sand ran out of the hourglass naturally because the economic engine simply seized up. The original cause of death was a spontaneous, total collapse in global demand.
People simply stopped buying, regardless of whether there was a tax on the goods or not.
This completely slaps the face of conventional history taught in high schools. We are taught that governments panicked, built walls, and that killed trade.
But the ledgers prove that trade was already dying while the borders were wide open.
But here's where the narrative shifts from bad to catastrophic. Because while tariffs didn't start the fire, the politicians eventually did panic. And the walls they decided to build changed the geographic map of the world forever.
After the ninth visual, we are calling this the fatal watershed. The British Empire turns inward.
On your mental screen, there is a long historical timeline. It stretches left to right. But right at November 1931, a violent red dashed line slashes straight through the timeline.
The historical path is suddenly replaced by a towering brick wall.
November 1931. The greatest lighthouse of free trade in human history goes completely dark. Britain makes a choice that literally breaks the world in half.
The domestic panic finally reached a boiling point. To save themselves from the bleeding, the UK abandons over a century of liberal trade policy.
They passed something called the Abnormal Importations Act. This piece of legislation allowed the British government to slap up to 100% taxes on foreign manufactured goods overnight.
100% tax. That isn't a policy tweak. That is an economic adjustment. That is a geographic earthquake.
Britain was the anchor of the global system. They had preached open doors for 100 years.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the biggest champion of your neighborhood watch, the guy whose doors are always unlocked, who hosts all the block parties, suddenly buying a shotgun, boarding up his windows with iron plates, and declaring martial law.
The psychological shock to the rest of the world must have been paralyzing.
It was paralyzing. But when a country builds a wall that high, they have to make extremely surgical decisions about who gets to come inside and who gets left out to die.
Which brings us to the 10th slide. Tariff walls, the essence of selective protection.
The visual is a chart showing tax rates on different types of goods. We have massive red glowing circles highlighting sudden violent spikes in taxes on manufacturing and agricultural goods.
But underneath those spikes, there is a completely flat line for raw materials.
A tariff wall doesn't crush everyone equally. When the government retreats into a bunker, who gets the VIP pass to come inside and who gets left out for the wolves?
The UK played favorites, and it was highly calculated. By 1932, the proportion of manufacturing and agricultural goods facing aggressive taxes skyrocketed.
They wanted to protect British factories and British farmers from any foreign competition.
Exactly. They wanted to guarantee that if British citizens were going to buy a tractor or a sack of wheat, they bought it from a British producer.
But the raw materials, the iron ore, the raw cotton.
They were given a free pass. The UK protected its finished products, but those factories still needed cheap cotton, cheap ore, and cheap fuel to keep their engines running.
So they let the foreign raw materials flow in without a tax.
It shows how protectionism is incredibly selfish and incredibly surgical. It is not a blanket you throw over the economy. It is a weapon pointed at specific foreign competitors.
You protect the final product you make, but you ruthlessly exploit the cheap raw inputs from poorer nations.
The logic was pure self-interest. But the most brutal weapon they deployed wasn't just sector-specific. It was geographical.
Look at slide 11, geographic severance birth of imperial preference.
The visual on your screen is a flowchart splitting into two paths. To the left, there is a smooth, glowing green path labeled Empire Channel 0% tax.
To the right, there is a jagged, red, violently blocked path labeled Foreign Channel greater than 20% tax.
A secret handshake in Ottawa, Canada, literally tore the global map into two hostile dimensions overnight.
The Ottawa Agreements of 1932. Britain realized it couldn't survive totally alone, so it created a closed loop with its empire. Canada, Australia, India, New Zealand, South Africa.
If you are inside the Empire Club, your industrial goods face less than a 5% tax entering Britain. Your agricultural products face zero tax.
And if you're outside the club,
You faced a brutal, unscalable 20% wall on your manufacturing.
this is the ultimate us versus them scenario. Think about the sheer terror of waking up in 1932 as an independent country. Say you are an exporter in South America or a manufacturer in Europe.
You wake up, read the morning paper, and realize that a massive chunk of the world's market just locked you out forever.
You didn't do anything wrong. Your products didn't get worse. You were just born on the wrong side of a political fence.
You are politically stranded. The multilateral world you relied on to sell your goods is dead.
But for Britain, sitting inside the bunker, it felt pretty warm, didn't it? Let's check out the 12th visual. Inside the firewall, the empire's illusion of self-sufficiency.
Look at the visual, a bright green arrow shooting upward. Bold text reads plus 1.02%, and underneath tiny text whispers, Empire raw materials plus 12.6%.
While the entire planet outside the wall is screaming in economic agony, Britain's backyard throws a party. Is this a miraculous recovery? Did the tariffs actually work? Or is it a dangerous illusion?
Look inside the walled garden. Between 1931 and 1933, at the darkest depths of the Depression, Britain's imports from within its empire did not fall. They actually grew by 1.02%.
And their raw material imports from the empire surged by over 12%.
They grew, while the rest of the world was collapsing.
Yes, the empire survived by cannibalizing the rest of the world's trade. It is a localized, completely artificial boom driven entirely by political walls.
They essentially forced their citizens to buy from inside the fence, which guaranteed revenue for the empire's producers.
I picture it like surviving a zombie apocalypse by locking yourself and your family inside a Costco. You have pallets of canned beans, you have diesel generators. For a minute sitting in the aisle, it feels great. You feel safe.
But you haven't cured the virus outside, you just hid from it.
And by hiding and hoarding the resources, you condemned everyone else to the hoard.
Which brings us to the 13th slide. Tragedy outside the wall. The hellish moment for the non-empire world.
The screen shows two pillars. On the left, a tiny green bump representing the empire's slight growth. On the right, a terrifying cliff-drop red pillar plunging straight into the floor. It is labeled negative 93.7%.
Britain's cozy little recovery inside the Costco was paid for in blood. Who was forced to pick up the tab?
The non-empire world was sent to hell. While empire imports grew slightly, foreign imports to the UK collapsed by 30.44%.
And foreign manufacturing. The people making finished goods outside the empire.
Violently cut in half, plunging 53.7%. Foreign producers were ruthlessly eradicated from the British market to artificially prop up the empire's numbers.
This is zero-sum survival. If you are listening right now, you need to feel the brutality of this statistic. One country's protective shield is another country's guillotine.
Britain didn't create new wealth or solve the Depression. They just violently transferred the suffering to foreigners who had no political voice. They exported their unemployment.
And while all this geopolitical bloodletting was happening, the microdata reveals a bizarre economic anomaly occurring with certain specific products.
Move to slide 14. We call this the mystery of prices that refuse to drop.
The visual is a minimalist double-quadrant scatter plot. The horizontal axis measures how unique or differentiated a product is. The vertical axis measures how much its price dropped during the crash.
There is a bright circle highlighting the top right corner. Highly unique items that flat out refuse to drop their prices.
Here's the mystery I couldn't wrap my head around. In an era where a loaf of bread's price is collapsing to pennies, where basic commodities are becoming practically worthless,
Why did the price of a fancy car or a highly specific precision machine flat out refuse to drop?
this is the secret of what economists call differentiated versus non-differentiated goods. Between 1929 and 1931, basic non-differentiated commodities, things like wheat, coal, simple materials, fell 15 to 17% in price almost immediately.
Because wheat is wheat. If an Argentine farmer won't sell it for cheap, an American farmer will. It's a total race to the bottom.
Exactly. But highly differentiated, durable industrial goods. Complex machines, branded equipment, precision instruments. Their prices barely dropped 2 to 3%.
Their prices were rock solid. They were practically immune to the gravitational pull of the Great Depression.
Let me translate this reality. If you sell a generic commodity, you have zero leverage. You are at the mercy of the mob, and you have to take whatever desperate price the market offers you.
But if you sell a highly specific branded machine part that a factory desperately needs to operate, you have the power to look the apocalypse in the eye and say no.
You have immense pricing power, even when the world is ending.
But wait, I have to push back on this. If nobody has any money because it's the Great Depression and you stubbornly refuse to lower the price of your premium machine, what happens? Nobody buys it. How do you survive?
Look at slide 15 to see what happens. Exchanging volume for price, uncompromising industrial power.
The screen shows two sharply contrasting lines. On the left, the price line is stubbornly, arrogantly flat. On the right, the quantity line drops off an absolute cliff.
So these premium, arrogant products that refuse to lower their prices, they survived by taking a massive voluntary beating in volume. Because the prices were absolutely rigid, the quantity they sold cratered.
I am stunned by this. Capitalists willingly choosing to sell nothing rather than sell for cheap. If I own a factory and nobody is buying my tractors, I still have to pay my rent. I still have to pay my workers.
Right.
Why on earth wouldn't I slash my prices just to get some cash flowing? How do these companies avoid bankruptcy?
Because of how variable costs work for complex goods. To make a tractor, you have to buy expensive components, pay specialized labor, and use immense energy. If you drop the price of the tractor, you might actually lose money on every single unit you build. So instead, manufacturers chose to violently slash production. They fired workers. They shut down assembly lines. They decided it was better to shrink the company down to a skeleton crew and preserve the premium value of their product than to discount it.
They would literally rather break the machine of their own company than lower the price.
Yes, and this exact dynamic is the blueprint for how modern vertical supply chains break down today. When complex, highly specialized components refuse to adjust their prices during a crisis, the entire supply chain freezes.
Volume collapses because the rigid links in the chain refuse to bend.
It's terrifying because it is so entirely rational for the individual business, but so destructive for the broader economy.
And speaking of breaking machines, let's look at what those tariff walls actually did to the mechanics of the world. Click over to the 16th visual, the cost of fragmentation, from balance to imbalance.
The visual is a global map showing arrows of trade flowing between continents. Before 1931, all the gray arrows shrink, but they shrink at the exact same rate.
After 1931, the green arrows inside the British Empire stay thick, but the red arrows pointing outward violently snap in half.
The crash of 2008 was a synchronized global heartbeat slowing down. Everyone suffered together, relatively speaking. But after 1931, the world's economic heartbeat became fatally irregular.
What happens when the collapse tilts entirely to one side?
Before 1931, the collapse was actually balanced. Empire and foreign imports fell side by side. The system was shrinking symmetrically, but the walls shattered the global multilateral clearing network.
Explain that mechanism. What is multilateral clearing?
In a healthy global economy, trade is multilateral. Country A buys from country B buys from country C, and country C buys from country A. The money flows in a massive, efficient circle.
Right.
But by forcing trade into isolated regional blocks, the UK tariffs destroyed the natural flow of global money. Trade was no longer finding the most efficient path. It was being forced into highly inefficient political paths.
It's like taking a beautifully complex Swiss-made clock and smashing it into three jagged pieces. You have the gears scattered on the table, and you are expecting each broken piece to somehow keep time on its own.
It creates a deeply inefficient world where money pools in the wrong places, and entire continents are starved of capital.
But Britain had one more radical move to make, one that actually saved their domestic economy, but shocked the world. Move to slide 17, smashing the golden shackles, leaving gold and the start of recovery.
The visual is a drawing of a heavy, solid golden chain. It is violently snapped in half. Next to it, the date 1931, pointing up toward a gentle, upward green curve representing economic recovery.
Britain committed an act that the international community viewed as an ultimate betrayal of trust, and it was the only thing that actually saved them from the abyss. September 1931. The UK abandons the gold standard.
The gold standard was the absolute anchor of the global financial system. Every currency was tied to it. It was the rule of law.
And under that rule of law, they were trapped in the deflationary death spiral we talked about earlier. Because their currency was pegged to gold, they couldn't just print more money to stimulate the economy.
By dropping this massive monetary anchor, by snapping the golden shackles, they freed themselves to control their own domestic money supply.
Sometimes the rules of the game are the very thing drowning you. Cutting the rope is the only way to swim to the surface.
By leaving gold, the pound devalued. Their exports became cheaper. They could finally print money and halt the deflationary spiral. It sparked a domestic recovery and explains why consumer goods eventually stabilized in the UK, even while the rest of the non-empire world burned.
They reclaimed their monetary sovereignty.
But I want to step back. Let's strip away all the 1930s politics. Strip away the empire preference. Strip away the gold standard. Strip away the specific tariffs. What are we actually left with?
Look at slide 18. 2 crises. 1 physical mold.
On the screen, 3 interlocking, heavy gray gears are grinding together. They're labeled intensive margin collapse, durables hit first, and price stickiness.
If we remove the politics, we uncover a terrifying truth. No matter how much technology advances, no matter how sophisticated our smartphones or our AI algorithms get, when the system breaks, it follows a 100% identical physical law.
Strip away the tariff walls, and 1929 and 2008 are identical twins. The micromechanics are exactly the same. The collapse happens along the intensive margin. Existing trade routes shrink but don't disappear.
The destruction zeroes in on car and durable markets instantly, and complex goods maintain rigid, sticky pricing while their sales volume craters.
It is the DNA of a global panic. Human beings in 1929 reacting to ticker tape act exactly the same as human beings in 2008 reacting to push notifications.
Fear is a constant. Panic is a constant. We just dress it up in new technology.
Which leads us to the ultimate tragedy of the system. Slide 19. The world's underlying logic, how globalization dies from involution.
The visual is a closed, circular chain reaction. It reads, crisis leads to tariff walls and factions, which leads to collapse of networks, which leads to long-term stagnation.
When the economic pie stops growing, when the crisis hits, the most logical, rational thing an individual nation can do to save itself is the exact thing that guarantees everyone's collective destruction.
It is a brutal paradox. Protecting your own yard is exactly what burns down the neighborhood.
It is the tragedy of the commons, played out on an apocalyptic scale. By retreating into balkanized, fragmented blocks like the empire preference nations build walls to protect their citizens, it makes total political sense.
But doing so destroys the multilateral efficiency of the entire world. Globalization doesn't die from old age. It dies from fear-driven involution. It dies from self-preservation.
You save your own factories, but you destroy the global network that allows anyone to afford what those factories make. It is a slow, suffocating death.
Which brings us to the end, the final slide.
Slide 20. Epilogue and revelation, are we replaying 1931?
The final slide on your screen is mostly empty space. It is dark. In the dead center, there is a massive dark gray question mark. Underneath it, a tiny chilling sentence. Is today the next 1931?
You've seen the watershed moment of 1931. You've seen how the granular data from those dusty ledgers proves that walls, once built, violently redirect the flow of global survival. Now look out your window at today's headlines.
Trade wars, tariffs, geopolitical factions locking each other out, supply chains being weaponized in the name of national security. Do you hear those footsteps?
We're stepping back from the slides now. What is the ultimate takeaway? In 1931, the world faced a crisis. And they chose to build walls instead of bridges.
They chose to violently strip foreign producers of their right to survive in order to protect domestic interests. And that choice shattered the multilateral clearing network, leading to decades of balkanized, fragmented stagnation.
Today, we are seeing the fracturing of multilateralism all over again. We are simply observing the rhyming of history.
We are absolutely not here to tell you who is right or wrong in today's political trade disputes.
Right.
Neither left-wing nor right-wing policies are being endorsed here. We are just looking at the math. The blueprint of how a system collapses is sitting right in front of us.
The mechanisms of fear do not change. The physics of a panic remain constant.
So I want you to take this thought with you. The next time you turn on the news and hear a politician confidently promising to protect your domestic industries by building a brand new tariff wall,
remember slide 13.
Remember that terrifying red cliff where foreign manufacturing was cut in half overnight? Ask yourself, who is standing on the outside of that wall? And what happens to the stability of the world when they have absolutely nothing left to lose?